Isn't it the $100 bill? Right? The Benjamins?
I should
Benjamin
probably,
Franklin?
I should probably know that. Uh, we can cut that out if we need to.
Wow, wow, I got that wow, wow. Anything that I want, I'ma get it now. Yeah, wow, wow.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Click-Worthy Convos. We are your hosts, Maureen and MD. Today, we're going to be talking about how to create a winning marketing strategy. And we are going to walk you through what we believe are the 4 pillars of creating a winning marketing strategy. And then if you go to our website, marketingperspective.com, you can actually download a free copy of the marketing plan that we put together, which will outline for you all the different steps and some questions you could be asking while creating your own marketing strategy.
I feel like that's giving away like a secret family recipe because I feel like we were talking about it earlier and you said you've been using this for years. So I would like to say that there's some credibility behind this being a secret recipe for success. So
Absolutely. It is a formula that I've been using for, I'm not going to date myself, but years. And I think it's something that could work regardless of industry, regardless of where you sit within marketing, regardless of what type of marketing plan you're trying to put together. And really it relies on four key pillars. The first one being business goals. The second one being know your audience. The third being crafting compelling messages. And then the fourth being activating your campaign and bringing it to life. And underneath there's a whole bunch of things that you want to consider. But we'll use this time right now just to go over those 4 pillars and just talk about them and how there's different ways that it could come to life, the different ways you could approach it, and ultimately how you wind up with a winning marketing strategy that you can activate and take into market.
let's do it. I'm excited.
Okay. All right. So the first one is business goals, which, I mean, there's all types of business goals, right? So sitting on the marketing side, you may actually have different goals than a P&L owner or your brand team. So what makes a good goal?
I mean, I think, first of all, aligning back to, overall business objectives. What are we trying to achieve? But I also think, something that you just touched on right there might be different P&L goals and there might be different product goals or things like that. I think it's important to have the right people in the room when you're crafting those goals. So like where you're headed as a business and make sure all of the pieces and players are in place to be able to achieve whatever goal that you might be set out to achieve, because there's nothing worse than doing work twice, in my opinion.
Couldn't agree more. But I do think you hear a lot about like goals need to be smart, right? So they need to be measurable. They need to be actionable. So what are some examples of good goals versus bad goals that we should be talking about? So I'll give us a good goal, right? So a good goal might be that you want to increase your website traffic by 30%, right? Through your marketing efforts, you're trying to drive traffic to your website. What's an idea of a bad goal?
Bad goal. Let's do something cool, or
Let's go viral.
I was just gonna say, you read my mind. I was just like, I think my second favorite is like, let's go viral.
Right. And I'm sure some folks would say you can measure whether or not something goes viral. But my definition of viral, given my current followers, could be like 10 people. Right?
Also, like, what's the point? Like, what is the point of going viral? It's a moment in time versus thinking about something that's really going to fuel scaling growth and longevity and something that's going to be a catalyst to build off of. Going viral is just like, done.
Yep. So I think things like driving sales, increasing conversion rates, those are things that you can make your goal and then set up reporting where you can measure how you're doing against that goal, which then allows you to continually optimize and refine, right? And so that really should be what you go back to is like, hey, you know, am I going to be able to have reporting that measures this? A good brand goal, increase brand recognition by X%, right? And that could be aided or unaided. That's a goal that a brand team may have where a P&L owner or your marketing team may not necessarily share that exact same goal. But making sure you understand, to your point that you said earlier, getting all the right people in the room and understanding what they want to get out of this certain project. And then making sure you kind of outline all of those goals so you can measure them at the end and make sure that you've developed a plan that kind of harkens back to all of those goals.
Well, and I think a big piece of that, like to kind of wrap this piece up, is just like, you know, when you have all of those people in the room and you have the whys and everything is predetermined, you can tell a stronger story to get more budget, to get more buy-in from the C-suite or the key stakeholders that, you know, are a little hesitant, want to deprioritize the initiative. I think it really kind of, you know, strengthen numbers, essentially. The more you have behind your goal, why you're driving it, what it's supposed to achieve, how all of the different parties are involved, the stronger your case is to get more, do more of this in the future.
I agree. And if you have a tough time figuring out goals, you probably need to ask yourself why you're doing the initiative to begin with.
Hundo P. Couldn't agree more.
There it is. So that's the first pillar. You can close that out. The second pillar, arguably, you're potentially the most important pillar of the four, is knowing your audience and understanding who you're trying to target, understanding everything, maybe not everything about them, but understanding enough that you can actually speak to them. And there's a couple of different approaches, right? So there's obviously understanding the demographics, which are things like age, income, household status. Are they married? Do they have children? Are they empty nesters? Like, these are things about your audience that are, I'll call them a little bit defined for where they are, but I think they influence education level. They influence how you make decisions, and your wants and needs for the point of where you are in your life.
I think the other piece is like, what's the so what? I had this ECD once. She asked me all the time, what's the so what? Like, why is your audience going to care about whatever campaign, product, message that you're putting out there? Like, is it fulfilling the needs of your target audience? I think that's a super important piece, just because if they don't care about it, none of it matters. So why is this relevant to them? So I think part of understanding your audience is understanding the relevance of your position to them. Because I think at the end of the day, you know, it's essentially all about relationships. Like, your job as a business, as a brand, is to maintain, foster, and create relationships with your customers. And I think that, you know, that's not easy work. You have to put work into it, like all good relationships.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah. I mean, I remember getting diaper ads, I think, when I was in college and being like, somebody trying to tell me something, and it just felt very irrelevant to me for where I was at that point in my life. And so it is really about, like, it's the right person, the right message at the right time, and knowing your audience, it is a big part of that, like where they are physically in their life and in their journey, where they are financially, where they are, even thinking into psychographics, like, what are their values? What do they look for in a brand? Do they want a brand that is environmentally conscious? Do they want a brand that's known for innovation, right? How do they spend their time? Are they on a yoga mat? Are they traveling, right? These are the things I think helps you get underneath and actually speak to the emotions of your audience that allows you to make a deeper connection.
I couldn't have said it better. I think understanding how to connect with them and in what way, I think making sure, and this kind of ties into the next pillar of messaging, is like how to communicate with them and how to come up with a campaign or a way in or territory or a platform that's really going to resonate with them. And it's not just out of left field or a cool idea.
Yeah. And I think it's also like you understand like when you know your audience, and there's a couple of different ways. Like you can do research, right? You could look at research that's already canned of what other people have uncovered about this demographic if you can't afford a bespoke research study. I think one of the other things that you can do is even, talking to some of your consumers, either through reviews, things like that. You can sort of see trends emerge. Spending data is a huge one, especially for folks in the finance industry. Like, what are they spending? What are they buying? You understand a little bit more of their habits, and then you're able to talk to them. Like research isn't always necessary, but if you can do it, I think research allows you to get a level deeper with your audience to really, really be able to understand what they might react to. I think one of the other things, just before we jump into messaging about your audience, is that, there's a couple of different ways that you can outline your audience. There are a lot of companies that create personas, right? So they'll say, her, and they'll talk about this woman that they cater to who, maybe she is a mom of two that's running around, dropping her kids at daycare, somebody in, but they create these personas that actually bring their audience to life. And you could have multiple personas for your business, but it helps you as as a creative, I think, say like, hey, is this persona going to buy this product based on how we're doing? So that's another way that you can really get underneath and know your audience, is the creation of personas.
I think that's a great point, because I think, what problem is this customer having? Like, why are they going to engage with you? What are you solving for? Gap are you filling? And then how are you going to make it matter to them? How are you going to communicate that from a position that's like, what's in it for me as a customer? So that I'm like, wow, I'm choosing that brand because they care about this, this, and this, which is something that aligns directly with the things that matter to me.
Yeah. And that just made me think the other thing that you understand is aligning what matters, but also understanding what barriers exist that prevent them from trusting or buying into these type of products.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's another huge thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we can totally get into a long conversation around audiences because there's so many specifics to it, and I think it goes back to being a relationship. Like, relationships aren't easy. I don't know any relationship in my life that is the same. I can't act the same way and interact with people the same way. Each individual relationship is different. So I have to cater to them. And it's just like an audience. Like, each audience is different. Like with the target audience and even with personas, you might have to think about the different ways to communicate with them, but also bringing it back to the customer journey. Are they a new customer or are they existing? Those things have to be catered to differently as well, because people want to feel valued and like, them and appreciating their existing relationship with you. You want that to be something that you don't just pass on and communicate with everyone the same way.
It's funny. I was actually just introducing my 10-year-old son to The Office. And in one of the first, I can't remember if it's the first season or early in the second season, there's a question. And it's like, what's easier to do, get a new customer or, keep an existing customer, and what's more profitable? And, Michael Scott, he never answers things correctly. I'm pretty sure it was either Michael Scott or Dwight. And he says, get a new customer. And he was like, false. So it does make me think like you do have to treat them differently. You have to recognize that, which I think is a really good transition into messaging, because what you touched on briefly, which we won't cover in this podcast, but is segmentation and ways that you can segment your audience. That's probably something we can reserve for a future podcast. But like, messaging is so important for your target audience, and kind of moving all of that information that you got, wants, needs, beliefs, income, all of that stuff, barriers to buy, into messaging, which is why crafting a really strong message strategy is the third pillar of a marketing strategy, and where you really need to make sure that you get it right.
Yeah, I think the most important thing when I think about messaging is simplicity and clarity. If people don't understand the value that you're bringing to them, or they don't understand the industry jargon, I think that's something that we were talking about earlier, like depending on, their level of education or familiarity with the products or the industry, none of it matters. So we need to communicate all of that in a way that's going to really resonate quickly, because you don't get a lot of attention when people are scanning through emails or looking at, out of home displays. You get like 3 seconds to grab someone's attention. So you need to make sure that your first in is one that hits and sticks.
Mm-hmm. And I think you touched on an important point, and I think it's a trap that a lot of financial institutions fall into is, I remember reading letters that had words like billing cycles, annual percentage rates, things like that, which is, that is real. It's real language, but it's industry jargon. And depending on who you're talking to, they don't understand exactly like what those terms mean and what a billing cycle means. They probably just think, hey, it's my March statement. They don't think, oh, it runs from, February 10th to March 9th, and then, it's due. So we do have to think about our audience and think about how do we put it in terms that they can understand. And that is what establishes that connection. When a customer feels like you're talking to me in words that I understand, like a human, not a lawyer, not a bank, like that really needs to come across in your messaging.
And you're making it easy for me to take that action that you want me to take. I think if you make it overcomplicated, or you make me hunt for more details, more research, a way to either buy in, apply, purchase, whatever it might be, whatever that action is, the simpler and the easier that is, the more likely that I'm willing to take that action. Because if I have to take a whole bunch of steps, if I don't understand it, I'm going to be so turned off so fast. And that's like your one shot. Like you don't get many chances to win people over again. So I think that it's something to make sure that you definitely want to validate with either testing or, again, a really thorough understanding of your audience.
Yeah. Yeah. Either through testing or research. Because one of the things that you said sort of struck me, but, really powerful messages being up top, like that's your message hierarchy. You could have, coming from the credit card industry, right? Like you could have 7, 8 different benefits, but the ones that customers care about the most, they need to be in the top 3, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you put something they don't care about as your first one, they're not going to read number 2. And so understanding what the customers value in your product is really what's the top billing. And then you could kind of go down, you could show that you have robust benefits, but really getting that hierarchy right. And some of that's test and learn, and some of that, to the point, is about, what audience are you targeting, where and when.
Absolutely. And I think clarity of those benefits too, right? Like I think if they are abstract, you get a special VIP deluxe membership to XYZ. Yeah, that sounds great, but what is that? Same thing with naming. If you're naming it something that's abstract, but it's really just a credit card, like it makes no sense. So I think that the consumer needs to have an understanding of the product, how it's going to benefit them, and the unique value proposition, like why would I get this from you versus somebody else? Because I think that a lot of times we're always thinking about what are competitors doing and how are we going to differentiate and how are we going to do this better? But I think it really needs to be hitting on the things that matter the customer the most, but doing it different. We can all talk about the same credit card rates, but if everybody's talking about rates, but you offer flexible payments, you could stand out in a crowded market. So I think it's understanding what really motivates the customer and then how to not do something better, but do something different.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing that's important in a message strategy, though, I think a lot of times we tend to think about like acquisition, right? And how are we going to acquire those customers and get them in the door? Or how are we going to get them to click on the apply now link? I think the piece that we're missing is your messaging isn't just about that one point in time, though that does seem to be the most important as a marketer, what we care about the most, cost to acquire, how many customers are we acquiring? But, when you think about like through the process where they're making the buy, right? Like through that conversion process, through the onboarding process, if they are a customer, like through the rest of their loyalty life cycle, like how does that product messaging move? How does it evolve? And if I have your product for a year, is that messaging and what I care about different, likely, than on the cost to acquire? And so how do you sort of map that out or attempt to map that out proactively across the customer journey so that you're getting it right in each stage?
I could ramble on about this for hours, but thinking about all of the different touch points of interaction. And that's why I think, really circling back to what we talked about at first, like having the right people in the room, different channel owners to understand which touch points of the customer journey are involved within this campaign or execution, because you can't have a killer acquisition campaign, but then they get into your experience and as an existing customer, it falls flat. That's not something that is going to retain a customer, because to your point, it is cheaper to retain existing customers versus to try to acquire new ones. So how are we doing that? Like, we can't just think about the instance in time. It's like the end-to-end comprehensive journey. How is it different? How are we being consistent? A user experience should almost be one that a customer doesn't notice at all, because it's so seamless, it's so simple, it's so easy, versus being like, oh, this onboarding piece of the experience is a pain and it's so difficult and I don't understand it. It should be as seamless as the application or the initial purchase was. Amazon, great example. Purchases and returns, both easy.
Yeah. It's consistency, right? Consistency in your brand. And that's what helps you sort of develop that reputation, whether, it's for excellent customer service, ease of use. Apple is very much about, their products are very easy to use, though some people as they age might argue that it's becoming a bit more complex. But but still, I mean, I use a Mac. All my stuff is connected. Like, it's very easy to use. It's very seamless. And so it doesn't matter where you are in the journey. Like, it still holds true as you go.
Absolutely.
All right. So our last pillar, activation. So I kind of think within activation, it's probably a little bit cheating, but there really are four things within activation. So, there's your key performance indicators, your KPIs. There's your channel strategy and test strategy, and then there's your tech requirements. So it is a bit cheating, but I think in order to effectively activate a campaign, you need to hit on all three of those things, not necessarily in that order. Before we did the podcast, Michaela and I engaged in a healthy debate about tech requirements and where do they fit, right? So it's 4 pillars. Tech requirements is kind of in the 4th pillar, but if you've done all this work and then you realize you have technical limitations that doesn't allow you to launch, have you wasted this? So, the one thing is it's not linear. As these things are coming up, you do want to be gathering your tech requirements, because if there are hard no's in your tech requirements, you have to figure out how does that impact your marketing plan, and does it still make it worth the investment that you would make to launch it without necessarily this one piece of technology in an ideal world you might have wanted to support.
Or, is there an argument that's so strong within your strategy for why this should be prioritized versus something else on the objectives or the roadmaps to bump it up to the top so that you do have the tech requirements. I think there's kind of two ways you come at it. Like, A, is it worth it if you don't have the requirements? Is it worth launching something that's not going to check all the boxes? Or B, do you have a case to make where you can get those resources and have buy-in from stakeholders to kind of prioritize your initiative?
Yep. Or is there an MVP and then an evolution plan? Although I know I'm a big one that people say it's a day 2 requirement. I always say day 2 never comes. So,
Couldn't agree more.
But let's talk about key performance indicators, right? So we talked about goals. My biggest thing in a key performance indicator is they have to map back to your goals, right? And you have to have reporting to be able to do it. If your KPI is web traffic, but your goal is acquisition, like, we've missed the mark in what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, I think part of it is like, are you going to be able to achieve the goals and the KPIs with the test? If you have a campaign that's going to only run for so long, but that isn't the ideal time frame for a campaign to run, is it going to give you accurate results to really read it and say, hey, we can deem this successful? Or was it cut short? And then you kind of lose your argument for more budget for future tests like that in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, getting those KPIs right, making sure they map back to your goals, making sure that you've got the right reporting in place in day 1, that you could then track that performance. The worst thing is like, hey, we launched this, how's it doing? We have no idea. Like, that is not, there's no, you can't say it wasn't successful, but you certainly can't say that it was successful. Talking about the channel strategy and the test and learn strategy. This is one, I think, that's driven by a number of factors, right? Like, channel strategy a lot of times is driven by 2 things. I think it's budget. Like, you're not going to do a super expensive direct mail campaign if you don't have the budget for direct mail. But I think it's also driven by your audience. And I know we keep kind of going back to that second pillar, which I said arguably is the number 1 pillar from an importance perspective. But if your customers aren't there, right? Like, hey, I'm going to target customers on Facebook who are, I don't know, 21 years old. I'm probably in the wrong place, right? So understanding where they consume that media so that when you make investments in budget, it's effective spending. So I think that those are really 2 things that drive your channel mix. Like, are your customers there? Can your budget support it? And I mean, ultimately, do you have the capability to do it?
Well, and I think to break into those, you have to be willing to fail, to learn, especially to break into new channels when it comes to channel strategy. It's just like, if you're not willing to fail and learn fast, to understand, is this a place that's going to work? What tweaks can we make? Or do we write it off? You have to take those risks. So kind of plotting out those risks as well is just like, when is the right time to do that? And how much are we going to do? I think, with A/B tests even, you can kind of identify where there's opportunity for more risk than less.
Yeah. And I think your desire to test, right? Test and learn quickly also then feeds into your channel strategy.
Yes.
Right? To test and learn quickly, direct mail, not a great channel for that, right? Paid media, great channel for that, right? You can test video, you can test static images, you can carousels, you could test all of these things within paid media. You could test it with different segments, you could run it across multiple segments, but that's one where you can very, very quickly test and learn what messages are resonating with your customers.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think, we've even proven out that breaking outside of the norm of what we normally test, what's the BAU, here's our main 3 RTVs, doing something that's outside of that, something that's different than what competitors are saying and doing in market, that has kind of broken through, but we never would have known if we didn't test it. So we had to be willing to put it out there and take the risk to understand, hey, is this going to do better or worse? And in some cases, it ends up outperforming, like with metrics we've never seen. So I think that's something definitely worth considering.
Yeah, I love that. I also love that you said like can't be afraid to fail, right? Like not I think we even said it on the last podcast as well. Is like I have a number of failures in my career that have given me great lessons that I could take forward. Like not everything's going to be a success, but you want to learn from your failures. And I think, a pretty common thing is like you want to fail fast and learn quickly. Like those are things that that really help you grow both as a marketer and as a person who develops marketing strategies for others.
I think that that is a critical piece of, even with the C-suite, because obviously they just, how much revenue, is it profitable? Is it making the money? And it's just like, if we don't try different things and if we don't do something different, if we're always doing the same, we're going to stay where we're at. We're not going to achieve growth. We're not going to, dominate the market in a different way or have an authority or differentiate. We're missing that piece of leveling up if we just keep rinse and repeat and recycle at what we've always done. You can't expect new and these glamorous results.
Yeah. So to recap, winning marketing strategy, 4 pillars. 1, make sure you've got good business goals. 2, know your audience. So important so that you can establish those connections. 3, create a compelling messaging strategy that speaks to those customers. And then 4, look at how you're activating your campaign to make sure you're connecting all the dots and everything's kind of coming together, both from a technology perspective, a channel mix perspective, as well as your ability to track results. And don't forget that we are not leaving you high and dry. If you go to our website, marketingperspective.com, we do have a marketing plan strategy that you can download for free. And it can get you started on how to create winning marketing strategies.
Got the secrets to success.
Secrets to success. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to MD to talk us through our segment of brands we love.
Brands we love. I think that's
and vibing on.
And vibing. Yeah, brands that are cool, brands that are, doing some cool stuff. I wanted to talk about Plaid. Plaid just recently did a brand refresh. If you haven't seen it yet, definitely go check it out. They made some cool little videos and kind of promoted it everywhere. But I think there's a few things that I really like about what they did. I think first and foremost, they took an extreme approach. They definitely modernized and leaned into the fintech edge, but I think in a crowded space, like fintech is such a crowded space, they position themselves in a way where they're going to stand out in market. And that I love breaking boundaries, doing something different, like mediocrity just isn't a word in my vocabulary. So I think that was definitely something that I loved about what they did. I think it was very fresh. They made their value prop and their benefits easier to read. They kind of simplified everything. The storytelling was very clear. They were very strategic with the things that they did in the refresh. I don't know how I feel yet about their illustration. I would say their rollout choices were also interesting. They were selective about the pages. They did not do their whole website at once. But I think that there could have been either tech limitations or it could have been a phased approach. I think you even mentioned that it could have been, a test and learn of how does this refresh really perform. And I think one of the things that it made me think about after we had the conversation was because it is quite a departure from where they were at previously. I wonder if there's going to be some loss of familiarity and like a little bit of loss of that equity that they built in their brand. So like the legacy is kind of gone and has taken a departure. So it could be like unfamiliar. Change is hard for everybody, but I think it could have thrown them.
Yeah, I think, with Plaid being a fintech too, like one of the things that I think is important is like fintechs want to iterate quickly. They want to move those tests into market. They want to learn is it going to work? Is it not going to work? Where I feel like more established brands try to be a bit more planful and to do kind of release everything at once. So it's not super disruptive, where I think somebody like a Plaid might just throw up a homepage and say, how does this impact our conversion rate? And, you've heard the term in the industry, like a do no harm test, right? So you take a portion of if you want to just refresh your brand, you take a portion of your population and you say, if our conversion rate, if our metric stays the same or increases, that's good. We know we want a brand refresh, but we want to make sure it's not going to tank.
Yeah. And I think they definitely did a lot more than a brand refresh. It felt like quite a departure. But I think the one thing with those iterative tests, I think they're super important. But I think you got to be in the details, because in their first release, I remember looking at it, there were glitches on mobile where you couldn't read the headlines of some of their value proposition. And I think the biggest takeaway or lesson learned that I would have taken from this situation is like, make sure you double check, even if it's just a homepage, get in the details, see how everything responds across devices, make sure you don't have any glitches, especially because today most customers are on mobile. So if they're checking you out when you're releasing these cool videos and things like that, people are going to want to see what's up and want to engage. But then if they land on your website and it's buggy and you can't read, you're like, come on, you were so close. So close.
But I think the bottom line is, Plaid, we like what you're doing. Ben Franklin smiling and deuces, keep it up. So Plaid joins the collection. Actually, they are our first brands that we love. So Plaid, we're impressed. Keep it up. We love to see your marketing strategy execute. We love that you aren't afraid to not have a perfect website. We think there's some lessons learned there, but overall, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for breaking through. Love to see it.
Thank you for breaking through. Love to see it. Love to see those fintechs taking risks.
Yes.
So with that wraps up episode 2, how to create a winning marketing strategy. This is Clickworthy Convos. You can follow us on YouTube. Please subscribe at Clickworthy Convos. Visit us on our website, marketingperspective.com. We are starting out with our own topics that we know people have talked about, but please, one of the hooks that we have here is our audience will submit marketing problems, challenges, or topics they just want to see us discuss. So please submit your topics. We are here. We are interested in what our audience wants to hear about, think about, wants to just hear us riff on. And we appreciate all of your loyalty. And coming up next in episode 3, it's going to be all about AI in marketing. And we will have a special guest, Sabrina DeVito, joining our conversation. She'll be our first special guest, so we're super excited to welcome her on the podcast. And I think with that, should we sign off?
We should. Yeah. We'll see y'all next time.
All right. Deuces.